Recently, there was a Lancet study which was covered by almost all the major news publications around the globe that the world population will peak in around 2065 and then decline in 2100 by 1 billion. So there will be 1 billion less people in 2100 than what we will have in 2065. And if we consider India's example, it showed that India's population will also peak in the same around mid 2060s, around 2065, and to 160 crore, and then decline to 100 crore, that is less than what we have even today by year 2100. So till recently we were discussing about population growth and how to control the population, and suddenly now the discussion about the population is going to decline. So what we can do and how to help that solve this problem of declining population. So we are going to cover into this video the same issue about declining population. Is it going to happen or not? And if we are going to see a decline in population, is it good or bad? So let's start the video. There are 6 parts of the video, and start with part 1, discussing more about this study and declining population. So yes, if you see these charts, all the major countries actually are going to see a decline in the population growth, and a lot of countries are actually going to see a decline in the population. Already there are 27 countries in the world which are seeing declining populations. Out of the major economies, that's led by Japan, which is already has seen a lot less population compared to what it had a decade or two before. So how does this declining population work, and how does the populations decline? It's a simple math. So if the nation's fertility rate is lower than the replacement rate, the population after a few years, few decades, starts declining. So what does that mean? So it takes at an average 2.1 child per female minimum for the population to keep growing. What it means is, if there are, let's say, 100 females, so they should have at least 5% more, 105, or if there are 200 female, they should have 210 children for the population to keep growing. Because if they are 200 and they only have 200 children, the population stays the same. And then even if 205, even the 5 more, still some people don't have kids for multiple reasons. Some people have kids, but those kids then thereafter don't like to have kids. A lot of things can happen. So that's why you need at least 2.5 at an average kid per couple or per female for the populations to rise. Now, if we keep this thing, so what's India's fertility rate? Now let's go to the India specific example. So our fertility rate right now is 2.24. It's just marginally ahead of the replacement rate. So we are very close to a point where our population will peak, stagnate, and then start declining. But if we dig further and we see this map, we go state-wise. Now this throws a very clear and different picture. If you can see, there are few states in northwest, you see Punjab, in south you see Kerala, Tamil Nadu, in east Sikkim. They have sown the seed of declining population. These states have a fertility rate of less than 1.7, which is lower than even countries like US. So India's population growth is mainly because of this 5-6 big red colored states. That is where the population still is growing at a pretty high rate. They have also seen a declining population growth, but still a lot more is to be done. And it's happening over a period of time. These states will also have lower population growth, and overall the country's population will decline. But apart from these 5-6 states, a lot of other bigger states and smaller states actually have very less fertility rate, even below the rate at which you can replace or keep the population growing. So a lot is happening if we see state-wise in different parts of the country. Now, why this matters, why declining population is considered not such a good idea, even though the countries, especially India, where we have a lot of population and we think, okay, how to actually reduce the population growth, they're talking about declining population also not being a good thing is a bit confusing. So let's see the example of countries where actually the population decline happened and what they are going through. The best example often discussed is Japan. So Japan was the first major economy which got developed, technologically advanced, and people started having few and few babies, and their population is already in a declining mold. So their population from around 13 crore, 130 million, will be just 100 million in next decade or so. That's a 30% population decline. So how is it affecting Japan? See this picture. This is a robot serving as a chef in a restaurant. So this is another picture. This is a robot. It's called cuddly. It's to cuddle, to hug people. So what does this show? Because there are very few people, actually now there are no more enough workers to work in different industries, and even not only professional wise, even in the personal social circles too. The old people don't have enough people to talk with them. They don't have their friend circle, their family circle, because over years, because of declining population, they are almost like lonely, and they are actually being reliant on robots for a basic human need of a hug or a cuddle. So population decline is happening more, in fact, in villages, if we see Japan's example, than in cities, because in villages anyways there were less babies are born, and secondly people from village migrate to cities. So there are some villages or some mountain regions in Japan where now population is less than half of what was few decades ago. So houses are being left empty. Governments are trying to figure out a way that if they can get some people from the cities to move on to villages, but that's not happening. Economy is growing at a snail's pace. Why? Because previously, let's say there were two people who were buying things, buying different homes. Now there's only one person, because they're one child and one child with another one child as a couple. They start staying together. So 4 people came down to 2. And they don't need maybe so many homes, they don't need so many cars, they don't need so much of consumption. So consumption-driven economy is declining. There's a negative growth rate. And now even if it's a growth rate is back up, they're trying to figure out how to get growth rate back up with this limited population. Still, it's not up to the mark. So we see this declining trend of population hurting the economy, socially as well, and professionally as well. Let's take the example of China. We all know that China implemented this one-child policy. When they implemented, a lot of world and everyone thought that's a nice policy, even though democracies can't have such kind of policy. But China tried and said, okay, fine, it looks good. But today, even China knows that that was not a good move. So what happened? They were able to control their population growth for a short period of time, 30-40 years. But now as more people are growing older, there are less younger people. So the younger people have more, they have to work more to feed the older people. By feed means to provide for the pensions, to provide for the healthcare. So government, because government earns through taxes from what the younger people earn, and government spends a lot of money on older people in forms of pensions, healthcare, and other needs of older people in all the major countries. So they're also facing this challenge. Now they're trying to go back to a 2-child policy, but if you have trained people's minds on something for 40-50 years, it's very difficult now to retrain them and reconvince them, your generation now should start having more kids. That's very difficult. That's not happening in China. So 27 countries right now in the world have declining population, and in next 20 years, there'll be 55 countries who will have declining population. Coming to India, will it affect India, this declining population, or not? So what happens is, the 2 things that we discussed in our China and Japan example, declining population hurts in majorly two ways, a lot of other things. One, the pension, and second, the healthcare. So how? Let's take that example, pension example. So as you know from your salary, you pay a little bit of amount to the pension fund, whether government or private. So you pay the amount, and the same thing happens in almost every country. So the pension funds then keep collecting this money, and then they invest this money mostly conservatively, because they don't want to invest all the money in equities and then suddenly find that they have lost the money, because they have to pay pensions in future with this amount. So they invest this money in bonds, which is like a fixed deposit, not exactly a fixed deposit, but like a fixed income source. And they make a prediction. For example, 30 years ago, this bond, they made a prediction, this pension funds made a prediction that, okay, our investment in next 30 years, when we have to pay pensions to these people, will grow at the rate, compounded rate of, let's say, 5%, and this will be the total amount, and we will be able to meet our financial obligations of pensions. But when the day came, because these are future projections, and there are a lot of variables in future projections which we or humans cannot think, even the economists cannot think, so new variables came in. The amount of return which they were expecting on these investments, they never came. The return on investment nowadays, even on fixed income, is way too low. Some developed countries, the fixed income returns are 1%, 0.5%. And in fact, in countries, for example, like Sweden, there's a negative fixed income return. Like banks actually don't pay you anything to keep money in the banks, or in fact, they charge a little bit of fee. So you're actually getting negative returns on your fixed income. So this calculation was never made 30 years ago. Now, when they have to pay the pensions, the money which they had, that was not enough. So today, whatever tax they are collecting from the people who are working as of today, instead of spending the tax on their welfare, on creating new roads, infrastructure, R&D and everything, they are taking part of that money, putting it into the pension funds to meet the obligations. So people who are earning are actually, one person who is earning is actually paying for two people's pension. So that's the one thing. Second, healthcare. When you grow old, you need healthcare. A lot of issues happen, for example, diabetes, heart issues, and a lot of other old age medical issues. So government needs to spend to keep these people in the medical system, to give them a good medical care. And that requires money. So whatever calculations were made, this much we will need to spend on healthcare, those calculations went haywire, and governments actually need to spend more than what they thought they had to spend. So now more money from the taxes are going into managing the healthcare for older people. On top of it, older people are now living much longer. So you have to support them for a much longer time. So these two major factors have contributed into making your calculations go haywire. And now the people who are earning, less people are earning, and they are supporting more older people in developed economies. And that is possibly what the countries like India also think, that what if the same scenario works out for us too in the year 2100? So we have to maybe plan for that. So that is why the declining population is usually not a good idea, so far whatever the data says. And humans always work on a futuristic projections, on a thought that is about the future and not about the past. We also always want to keep progress. For us, progress is moving step ahead. So let's say if you are at level 1 in your living standard, and if you move to level 10, and then if someone has to say that, okay, you have to now come back to level 7, live there, you think, oh, how can I now live at level 7 of my living standard when I was already at 10? So for the countries where they actually grew and then their economies are shrinking, or their life standard of living is getting slightly negative from top, they face the problem. But if, let's say, if someone is already level 1 or 2 and they go to level 6, for them that's always a progress. So Japan, China, so that's why declining population. Now economies are hurting, they have less money to spend on people who are working right now. So they think that's not a good idea. But let's consider India's example. A lot of times what happens is countries or people who are not the first movers are at an advantage. Or in other terms, we can say first mover disadvantage. What does that mean? So consider Japan's example. It never had any other country gone through the same thing. So it never had any study or any research, real data to understand how to solve this problem. So they are experimenting different things. Some are working, some are not working. Similarly, in 20 years, China will experiment different things, how to handle the declining population scenario. So there will be, as I said, 55 countries who will be going through these scenarios. A lot of these countries will try few things, and some other countries will try some other things. Some will work, some not work. So when India will reach at that stage, we will already be having the data from all these countries, and we can then implement the policies which work best, rather than experimenting with all different things, and some may work, some may not work. We have already done that in the past. For example, telecom. A lot of developed countries, first everyone there had the landline phones, and then they graduated to the cell phones. But here, everyone in India never had the landline phones. Only like 3 to 5% people, if I'm not wrong, definitely, but it's less than 10% people had the landlines. And then everyone actually went to cell phones. So a lot of people never actually saw the landline. So we leapfrogged straight away to cell phones. Why? Because we had all this data from other countries who went through this process before us, and we studied. We said, okay, we don't need landlines. Straight away we can go to a cell phone. Similarly, in declining population scenarios too, we can see what happens in these countries and then implement only the good policies by taking leaps and bounds rather than growing one step at a time. So we are in a good scenario, good situation, nothing to worry about. Our population will take care by itself. And there might be a lot of variables. It's still 80 years since this scenario plays out, and a lot of things can happen. A lot of new variables can come up. For example, we might have a robot which you can buy and then rent it out to work for you, and there's a tax on what the robot works for you, and that tax goes towards your government. So that could happen. So you may not even need to work a lot of jobs. Someone else is working for you, which is not human, and you are just enjoying your life. So that scenario can play out, and a lot of other scenarios can play out. So let's see what happens in future. But this was something I found very interesting that we should discuss about declining population. Whatever your comments are, positive, negative, what you liked, you didn't like, or your thoughts, write in the comment. See you in next video with another interesting topic. Till then, goodbye.